Okay, so I can't guarantee the audio quality here or any connectivity issues uh, because I'm just sitting down to stream this, since recording it is a little bit more involved with OBS. So I have to respond to Curt Doolittle's comment response to my last video, and it's the typical kind of rhetoric we see from Curt. Um, Again, there might be issues with this. I'm not checking the comments, so unfortunately I won't be able to know just the nature of this. And I don't know where my HDMI cord is, so I can't plug in my second monitor, so I can't move any boxes around or it'll mess up the setup here. But anyway, and my son was just born 2 days ago, and so he's napping now. My whole family's napping now, so if I have to go suddenly, they probably woke up. But I do feel like I should at least get to this. All right, so let's just read what Curt has here. First, while you consider this a warning, it is just extremely good advertising. The thought had occurred to me, but I'm not really concerned about preventing you from doing what you want to do. I don't think that's possible. Some idiots will get themselves involved in some suicidal thing at some point, but me and the people I'm associated with, hopefully we can be spared. And so I just think it's kind of a moral duty, A, to dissociate myself, and also B, to warn people who might, be on my side on this. And then because the person who would be as fearful as you are would have no value in altering the status quo, which this is a central critique of many of the comments of my last video, which is basically like, what? You're not down for a revolution against the government? Pussy. Like, it's stupid. It's so ridiculous. Fearful of ruining our lives, getting ourselves killed, ruining the cause? I mean, I guess you would say I'm fearful of that. It's an accurate description, but I don't think it's an irrational fear. And I'm not some loser who has nothing to lose. I have a family and a job and things going on in my life, and stability and abundance are infinitely better than scarcity and chaos for raising a family and that sort of thing. So yeah, I know I can't prevent everyone from doing this, but hopefully like well-adjusted people won't be involved, and I don't know, hopefully other people also will see what Curt is doing and warn their own audience about it. I think everyone has a moral duty here to at least warn the people that they can influence about this, those of us involved in these circles. And then, while at the same time, those people that listen to this who would have value in altering the status quo would merely be driven to interest in our work. That's possible. I don't think you need me to advertise for you. I have a very small audience. You have a much larger reach at this point. And then second, you are a good person, right? So flattery. This is his rhetoric. He flatters up front to get you to accept his message, and then by the end, he's like harshly criticizing you, shaming you, to get you to guilt you into switching your position. This is very consistent in his rhetoric. I have known you to be a good person and a moral person. I see nothing in this criticism that is not intellectually honest. I like you, and I will probably always do so because there is not much else to ask of fellow humans but to be good, moral, and intellectually honest. Well, I mean, his definition of good and moral, I think, differ from mine. But to be fair, I like Curt as well. I think, I'm interested in what he's saying regardless of how stupid it is. That's why I kind of lean toward the Fed hypothesis, because he doesn't seem like a crazy person. He doesn't seem like a stupid person. And anyone, I think, who's out calling for revolution against the government, let's get ourselves killed, yeah, they're either stupid, crazy, or a Fed themselves. And then, yeah, now except for the wacky stuff about being a Fed, being a Fed or doggy robots, this isn't a bad bundle of criticisms. Why is it wacky to consider the possibility that you might be a Fed? I think it's totally reasonable. You're in the right age range. You have the right work history. You've been in the right physical locations. You are from a long military family. You are one of the Anglo elites, essentially. Why is that? You're exactly the kind of person to look to be a Fed. Same with Richard Spencer, although I don't know. I mean, he's more obviously a failure than Curt is, so I don't think Richard's a Fed just because he's mishandled things so badly. And then doggy robots. The reason I said that, I called it to mind, was that I had a friend who studied engineering, mechanical engineering at MIT, and then he went to Stanford. And I was talking to him, I don't know, a year ago, and he was telling me about a program that he was working on where basically they were analyzing, and I didn't say doggy, I said cheetah, analyzing cheetahs' legs, how they operate, and then building mechanical, analogs to the cheetah. So that's where I pulled that out of. But I don't know why that's strange. Like, you've seen what DARPA has done with Big Dog and the other robots they're working on. And plus, like, robots have combat kills, right? We can remote control robots, and AI drones are perfectly capable of taking out conducting strikes, taking out people. I mean, we have the technology now for like fleets of very inexpensive drones that could detonate or whatnot. I mean, you go to Best Buy and you see these drones. Like, the military application is huge, and this is all stuff that could run on AI, that could run by remote control, where you don't necessarily need soldiers in the fray who, yes, might defect if they saw that they had more in common with the revolutionaries. And then, but that said, they are just fears, not faults. Well, he never addresses, I'm just going to say, I don't think he addresses the two main epistemological concerns. And as we go through, I'll try to remember if he addresses the others. Just his hurt feelings are the same as harms, or not the same, I think he tries to say. But yeah, this is clearly all rhetoric, right? So far, we just have rhetoric. We just have setting the tone. This is how Curt's writing works. And very often, when he makes claims, he's making reference to like where he explains it somewhere else. And this is a characteristic of cults, of cult leaders, or religious systems generally. We're like, oh, we have the answer for that. It's over somewhere else. Right now we're talking about this. We'll explain that aspect of things eventually. But nothing is ever fully explained. You just kind of discursively, in this, if you follow his feed, this is what you see, or his writing generally. He brings out a lot of facts, a lot of points, but there's no systematic explanation, building an argument from first principles or anything like that. So I'm operating under the understanding that what you are evincing in your argument and demeanor is fear. Yes, I'm afraid you're going to get a lot of people killed and you're going to ruin my political prospects. And then no disagreement on your statement of objective, although my objective is more subtle. The certainty of revolt brings options to the table. Yeah, I know, I was kind of loose with my language overall in that video. I'm not using Curt's terms. And that's another characteristic of cults, by the way. If you've studied cults, you know that a lot of what Curt does fits exactly with how cult leaders operate. But, yeah, because they have their own terminology. They have your own, there's, a unique language that you have to learn to be inculcated in. And this is, I could get into, like, why they do that. But, I mean, it's kind of obvious. Once you invest time in learning a vocabulary in order to even evaluate the argument in the first place, you're more likely then to be persuaded by like secondary factors, like the people that you're interacting with in the cult and the environment and just the constant repetition of claims. So, if you just had things explained in common sense terms, like universal terms that people could just pick up and read without looking through a whole list of definitions and consulting the whole network of related points in, for example, proprietarianism, then you'd really just have to evaluate it on the weight of the argument. Curt doesn't typically make detailed arguments. He's going to claim that he does later, but nothing in this comment is a detailed argument. It's all just assertion. Certainty of revolt brings options to the table. This is stated repeatedly through the work. the more certain the revolution, the more likely it is unnecessary. I mean, you talk about revolution comes. Some of this, I don't know. I haven't read everything on your site. I haven't followed every single post on your Facebook. But you talk in this kind of like civil war is definitely coming, revolution is definitely coming kind of way. Often you also talk about how a small group of men, what they would be able to do in such a circumstance. So a lot of this is not so much like what's in your system as a whole as what is the effect that it portrays, because people might act according to that rhetoric that they see, and maybe you qualify things in some technical way somewhere else, but like this is an example of the kind of speech, public speech, that you should be prohibiting under your kind of legal system, where you are imposing costs on the commons by talking in this loose way about revolution. Where what if somebody takes you seriously and tries to launch something? Aren't you contributing to that that threat? And then I set out to produce, and again, this is what people in religions and cults typically do. They don't engage in the argument in like a mutual way. They're just going to repeat their own terms over and over and over, their own arguments, or their worldview. So I set out to produce, this is just advertising for his system, a moral license, which I don't think he like produces a fundamental moral license, but you can see how the rhetoric is constructed to get people to believe that they have a worthy cause. And I think he's conscious of this, that really it's a rhetorical device, the moral license, that it doesn't actually get down to this is good or this, and he's a moral nihilist, essentially, philosophically. A set of demands, a plan of transition, and I haven't seen so much of this plan of transition. Maybe he's written more on that lately. And a means to alter the status quo. Yeah, this is what is required for political change that would restore the Constitution to one of natural law, insulate it from future abuses by legislation from the bench, and to eliminate the predation of our people. But yeah, the more advertisement for his system. That's all this is. And like, he's kind of begging questions here. Restore our Constitution to one of natural law, implying that his conception of natural law, reciprocity, is something that our Constitution was actually built off of. I'm not sure that it was. I'm not sure that it can be shown that natural law in his conception is actually natural. I don't think, I mean, reciprocity is powerful as a heuristic, and you can understand law through that lens, but you absolutely don't have to. He's arguing that, systems of government are more efficient with reciprocity as the basis. Insulate it from future abuses, protect our people from, etc., political classes that have been able to use the media to develop an industrialization of deception on a scale not possible since the formation of the monotheistic religions under their near monopoly on writing. No one disagrees that the media being controlled by who it's controlled by has led to a lot of deception. Obviously it has. And the idea that we should outlaw certain forms of deception, I don't have a problem with that. Certain forms, but when you get into, you're going to throw all of philosophy out, you're going to throw all of psychology out. There are whole fields that you categorically dismiss because they don't meet your standards for epistemology. Like, you take it much further than you have to go. Maybe in your mind this is how it has to be. I think you're overreaching there. And then, no, writing plans was not my job. I have definitely written plans. Well, this is from a private conversation. We talked on the phone, and I thought that you said that writing plans was your actual job, but whatever. He's saying it's no big deal, basically, that he was writing these plans to destabilize governments, and these are just war games, basically. They're unsophisticated. He is just in Ukraine to watch it firsthand. Yeah, you can say that. I mean, the possibility is there, and that's all. I can't firmly say that you're definitely a Fed, obviously, and you can't disprove it, but just given your actions, that's the most likely outcome. And then in the battle between opinions, I'm sure I have more knowledge of the available resources, and this information is not exactly hard to come by if you follow the think tanks. As far as, I think he's talking about the government's capabilities for responding to revolution. And then, yeah, he's saying that all I'm offering is fear. If I had anything specific that the government had, I would offer it. But that's my general critique is you don't know what the government has just because you're reading it in think tanks. Is that necessarily the extent of it? Like, we don't know about classified projects until decades after, oftentimes. So I mean, that's just, you don't address that criticism. I think that's a central critique. You're advocating revolution when you can't guarantee that the government doesn't have technologies that would render it impossible. And what they have already with drones, with robotics, I just see it being basically impossible. I mean, we're talking about guys in pickup trucks with guns, with explosives, setting fires. Yeah, we can damage the infrastructure. I don't think that's going to endear people to our cause. I think they control the propaganda machine. They can send mass texts through the phone. So it's not like you're going to have control of the messaging in this revolutionary campaign. It's going to be the government who tells everyone what's happening. And I mean, that much we definitely know. And first of all, I think the burden of proof is on the person saying we can take on the government to demonstrate that it is possible. And I'm saying you can't demonstrate that it's possible because you don't know what they have. That too much is classified. And yeah, I think it's irresponsible. It's definitely causing a lot of threat, a lot of sorry, I have a cold right now as well. But it's endangering people to be talking about revolution when you can't guarantee that there's any possibility of success. And then I understand you are scared, but many of us are not scared. Yeah, losers aren't scared who have nothing to lose by getting themselves killed. I know. The people who follow Curt Doolittle are usually losers. They're usually autistic. Yeah, they're tech people and like sophisticated people. But the people who he wants, and he talks about this, right? He has like the different levels of people that he has following him, and he regards a certain class of them. Not all of them are losers, but there is a certain class of them that are meant to be just foot soldiers, that are meant to be cannon fodder, and he's willing to sacrifice those people. And he claims that he's willing to go down in the fight, but at other times he's said like it's not his place, he's just writing up the system. The revolution's for somebody else. I don't know. There's a lot of vagary here. And then I understand that you've been threatened by Adam. I don't remember being threatened. And my discussion of metaphysics and the inability of deceits to survive testimonial criticism. Yeah, okay, so why testimonialism in the first place? It has to be, this is my like, epistemology is not separate from morality, because you can justify testimonialism by saying the end result of operating under this epistemology is that you invent more technologies, you model the world in such a way that it becomes more manipulatable. That's a common like argument for Anglo-empirical science, that it works, right? We're able to do these things. But again, what if an alternative epistemological method that had higher demands than just via negativa, what if that prevented unnecessary or like dangerous development in a certain regard? It's like, I don't know. Where does he argue for testimonialism? Why are we supposed to believe this is the end all be all? And then I understand you're panicking because our movement is scaling rather rapidly. I mean, it's unsettling to look at the website and look at John Mark's channel. But you guys are going to do what you're going to do. I wish you wouldn't do that because it's going to have a very harmful effect on me because you're going to fail. You're not going to succeed in this. With regard to scaling, you talk about like Aryans and the white man and shit like that, where you have a very narrow base of people who are willing to accept those arguments in the first place. You're talking like less than 1 million for sure of people on the internet indoctrinating themselves in this kind of ideology, and the rest of the population just gets what they get from the mainstream, which is completely antithetical to that. And so the way that you've set up your rhetoric on the website, you're only talking to like the former alt-right, essentially, and associated movements, NRX and whatnot. And it's so marginal. You can expand to get the same kind of audience that like JF Gariepi gets and those sorts of people, but how are you going to scale beyond that? And you think that's enough? If you have a YouTube channel that gets 10,000 views a video or even 50,000 views a video, how many of those people equal revolutionaries? Online, you get like, 10 people watching. This is just a general kind of metric. 10 people watching for every one person who likes it, and then like 100 people watching for every one person who pays. And, it's getting people to actually do this. You can get a small group, but a small group's not enough. What's the market? Where are you going to scale into? I don't see this happening, especially when you look at the page on Revolution. You explicitly use the word Aryan, which just turns people off in the first place. I don't see this happening. And then I understand that you're frustrated because you cannot find a way to preserve your self-illusions in a court of law. And this is just presupposition. He's assuming that my idealism is totally wrong. I don't think he necessarily understands what my sense of idealism is, and he has said in the past he won't debate idealism. But it's nothing, and I'll give a basic argument. Like, you can't testify to it in the sense of testimonialism, but there are possible ways the universe could be, right? And I know I'm going to lose a lot of people here by talking about this, but whatever. The notion is, if this is my way of looking at it, but it's echoed in other philosophies, and people derive this conclusion from other means, but the universe may be infinite. There's no way to disprove that. There's no way to prove that. We can't know fundamentally. If it is infinite, then there's all sorts of conclusions that you can draw. And basically, like, temporal A theory can't be right, temporal B theory must be right. Because temporal A theory saying that like cause and effect creates the new reality, and the previous reality ceases to be, and that reality is made in this way. Like, it's like when you're reading a book and you're engaged in reading, it seems like the book is happening as you read it, but no, the book is just sitting there. The universe, if it's infinite, would be the same kind of thing. Because for it to not be there all at once, it would be finite in that respect. If it's absolutely infinite, then you can't, like, immortality of the soul necessarily follows. And I have other videos where I make that argument. But this is all, like, hypothetical reasoning, where if A, then B. If the universe is infinite, then these other conclusions. And all of that combined with, like, a general, like, phenomenalist epistemology where all that we have evidence of is the mind. He talks about, briefly, he addresses the whole like hard problem of consciousness issue, which I don't think he understands. Basically boils down to what is matter as distinct from mind. We have experience. There are other things, supposedly. What is the difference? What's the dualism there? How do you get matter to behave like mind? It seems like it's a fundamentally different kind of thing. Quanta versus qualia. How do you account for this? And there's no like mechanistic way of accounting for it. Fundamentally, there is experience, and the matter, the mechanism, is a model within experience. At a basic level, that is more certain than to say that the mechanism is this process that's been evolving and it produced consciousness. Curt makes that kind of claim, but you can't prove that. You don't know that the mechanism came first and then consciousness evolved out of it. Consciousness is all that we know exists for sure. Everything else is modeled by consciousness. And so the notion that the universe might be consciousness fundamentally, like, these are, I think if you reduce things down to a single epistemological framework, first of all, you're going to have to presuppose that framework, because the framework can't justify itself, which is why I say epistemology is not separate from morality. And since Curt's a moral nihilist, this whole thing reduces to, I like this epistemology because it yields conclusions that I like, right? It's the kind of worldview that appeals to my intuitions. he can't justify it any more than that. And this is kind of hard to just address all of this on the fly like this without getting into specific points. I'm still willing to debate anybody. Zero challenges to debate. I would debate Curt. I would debate anybody associated with this, but nobody wants to because you would lose. Because you know that you have all these presuppositions. You just want to do what you want to do because maybe you have like nothing going for you in the world as it is, and so you want to throw this revolution. And yes, there are, you know, threats against the race and all this other stuff, but there are things that we can do aside from revolution. And yes, I prefer religion as an alternative. The Amish survive. The Amish probably will continue to survive despite the problems with modernity. So yeah, this boils down to him calling me a coward for not supporting revolution, and I just think it's ridiculous. And then, let's see. I understand you're frustrated because you cannot find a way to preserve your self-illusions in a court of law. Like, yeah, in his worldview, he says that my idealism wouldn't stand up. But it's all hypothetical. I'm not like asserting this as axiomatically true. It's like, if you believe the universe is infinite, then follow me in this process of reasoning to conclude the things that I conclude. And then the testimonialism of meditation and what those experiences are as experiences. Now, he'll like to reduce it to, oh, it's the state just above sleep or whatnot, which it's all like a mechanistic explanation for how the experience comes about. But some people might be interested in experience qua experience. And there is a testimonialism of that realm, and that's what a lot of religion is. It's about having people follow you in this course of meditation, cultivation, whatever it is, yoga, and that has, maybe that wouldn't survive in a court of law according to testimonialism, but anyway. The court could prevent you from spreading those illusions or maintaining those illusions. I don't think Curt knows. He's just asserting that it wouldn't survive the test. I don't think Curt really knows my position. The difference is that today you and the left can do so. Yeah. So where we would prevent you and the left from doing so in the commons, conspiracy to conduct fraud. Yeah, so he's saying I could get away with being religious or being like having a spiritual notion or anything like that in the current situation. I wouldn't in the alternative. He's talking about like clamping down on any talk of spiritual matters. It just seems so dystopian, and like it's literally what is talked about in the book of Revelations, that you won't be allowed to worship any god except for the Antichrist, and he talks about wanting to become gods. I don't know. There's some like really weird apocalyptic dimensions to this. Not to mention how I'm haplotype Y haplotype R1A, and he's R1B, and R1B. Maybe they were in the steppe at some point, but they went down and got involved with the Makeup culture and some of their predecessors, and got involved in like bronze smithing and stuff like that, and like social engineering probably generally, because these were large settlements that they make up, and then they went up to start the Yamna. So R1B, this kind of like technocrat class of organization, started the Yamna culture, and then later on, the R1A, who had remained in the steppe the whole time, in the forest steppe region, R1A produced eventually Santashta, which is the beginnings of the Vedic tradition. The first horse sacrifice matching the Vedas is from Santashta, and that's the population that would go off to form the Indo-Aryan branch. And so it's just interesting then that he's R1B, he's advocating this technocratic, materialistic perspective, and I'm R1A, and I'm advocating more of a spiritualist perspective. And, this is a matter of appealing to people's sympathies. A lot of people don't want to think about spiritual things and aren't apt to think of things in spiritual terms. But anyway, now if your illusions are a cost of eradicating the eradication of leftism in all its forms, then it's a cost I'm willing to pay for our people, just as priming a drug addict. Yeah, this is all rhetoric, all assertion, no addressing my actual position, or like what I'm afraid of losing. And he's referencing, I think, in this a discussion I just had with him about cause and effect, where causality is a metaphysical assumption, right? Like Hume said, all we know is associations. We can know that A is associated with B, but as far as A produces B or A causes B, that is inherently a metaphysical speculation. We can't actually ground that from empirical evidence alone. This is what is commonly said as correlation does not imply causation. And actually, like rigorously speaking, nothing implies causation. Causation must be a speculation in the first place. It's like I said, is it the book as you're reading it being caused into existence, or is it that the book is all there and these associations are part of a linguistic structure, a mental structure perhaps? It's beyond the realm of what empirical evidence proves or disproves, this kind of speculation. I just don't think he's very comfortable thinking about it, or he can't think about it. I've talked to him about, like, why should I prefer, a lot of his statements imply temporal A theory over B theory. A lot of the modern physicists prefer temporal B theory. Why should I prefer A over B? And it's just an assumption. And this is where I think he's not actually genuine here. I think he just wants to appeal to people's sentiments, the kind of people that would go along with what he wants to do. He's not interested in really being right or proving his epistemology ultimately sound or more well-grounded. He just is using what he can to affect the results he wants to affect, which is a revolution for whatever purpose. And then let's get into his other arguments. I need to speed it up here. So I know you were scared of losing supernaturalism and idealism as your preferred drug of escapism. This is more just name-calling. Say you're scared, what you believe is supernaturalism. And yes, it is idealism, but I don't think he understands what philosophical idealism is. As your preferred drug of escapism, and I don't see why that would be escapism. Again, like, phenomenology is about acknowledging that what we know directly is experience and not escaping from that with mental models that we reify into the actual reality. And that's what Curt does. The mechanistic explanation of the world, the model of the world, he reifies to be the world itself, and then turns the excuse me, like I said, I had a cold. This is not the best time to be doing this, but I got to put something out. And then that he kind of turns around and says, this model that I have of the world, what's going on in that, that's what produces the experience of the model. And that fundamentally cannot be justified or proven. I'm not going to use all of Curt's terms because I don't have a convincing reason why that epistemological framework over another. And if Curt has this secret to basically, like, cutting down every falsehood, why don't you go through some recent, journals from psychology or whatnot and demonstrate exactly how these tests can be applied? I haven't found that, right? Take an example of public speech that's being produced now and then show exactly how you test it for due diligence, how you test it for being operational. And I agree with Imperius that, like, operational language doesn't exist in common speech. He kind of assumes it because he's so used to programming where, like, yeah, it's based on operationalism. But human language, there's no operationalism in it. Or that's not its basis. It depends on analogy, and I don't think Curt really understands what analogy is fundamentally. Like, people don't. It's kind of mysterious how analogy works in the first place. This does not mean it is ethical or good in any such positive to conspire to create falsehoods that produce externalities in the commons. I know this is the purpose of your criticism. Yeah, create falsehoods. Again, he's just ipse dixit. Curt says idealism's wrong, therefore it's wrong, without any argument whatsoever. Anyone who categorically dismisses any source of argument and says only the people who argue in the frame that I'm arguing in are legitimate, like, that's the ultimate question beg. Do you realize that? It's literally begging the question, and he does this writ large across his whole ideology. It's all question begging. It's all assertion. This is how you convince masses of not so bright people to follow you. It's a death cult. That's what it is. This is the purpose of my criticisms, to spread falsehoods. What falsehoods am I even spreading? If you watch my channel, I don't make a bunch of hard claims. Everything is tentative. Everything is arguing as far as I can. And I'm interested in questions that empiricism can't address. Yes, metaphysical questions, the origin of things in the first place, the nature of reality as a whole, right? Not just what we can experience with the observable universe. And if Curt just wants to be an empiricist and look at the observable universe, then fine. But there may be extrapolations from metaphysical presuppositions that have implications for our actual experience. And we can't justify the presuppositions, that's why they're presuppositions at the metaphysical level. But this sort of argument, like, I'm not making these hard claims, and I don't see why even Curt's system would necessarily shut them down. Are you not allowed to speak speculatively if you acknowledge in your speech that this is a speculation, that this is conditional on certain presuppositions? The rest is cover for your mysticism. Curt doesn't know my ideology. He just uses the term mysticism because he knows that people have a negative connotation associated with it. And so he's going to call me a mystic and an idealist without really understanding what it is I actually believe. He's not interested in arguing in good faith, understanding where the other person is coming from. He's interested in gaslighting, question begging, and just bald assertion. I know your world is threatened. It is threatened, in fact, because the majority will easily trade the end of commercial, financial, academic, and political deceit for a return to trustworthy speech. Every random group that we test on buys it. I don't know. Can you demonstrate that? Can you demonstrate that you've performed due diligence there? The majority will easily. The majority, have you tested like samples from the majority, not from fringe internet people? Have you performed due diligence there? Where's the operational argument here? Like, he talks, this is what Aristotle does, by the way, as well. He talks about what a demonstration is, which is this strict method for constructing an argument that's kind of foolproof, and then never demonstrates according to his own principles. 2, there is a reason you are not using examples rather than vague critique. This is because if you used examples, I could test them and show their nonsensical fears. Courts are practical, juries are practical, common law. I did use one example. What do you do with a book like Deleuze's Thousand Plateaus, or any such like literary work that's kind of complex, that kind of bridges the gap between like an empirical claim and, I don't know, some genre of literature? How does the judge understand it necessarily in the first place? Like, that was it is a general level critique, and I don't see, like, or another example, you don't like Chris Langan's CTMU. Well, if Chris Langan published, perform those tests. Show me the example. You're the one calling for a revolution against the government, all right? I think the burden of proof is on you, not to educate, but to demonstrate that you're not just bullshitting here. If Curt's CTMU were put forward under your system of government, then what would happen? Like, test that. Test that as a case. Because on your quorum review of the CTMU, you did nothing like that. You did your same typical rhetoric that is asserting and generalizing and not actually addressing the argument, not actually addressing what's being said. There's a reason you are not using... Yeah, I already read that. And then courts are practical, juries are practical, common law accumulates rapidly and adjusts rapidly. Courts don't do what you want them to do, which is to demonstrate that someone has performed due diligence against error, deceit, fraud, blah, blah, blah. Courts don't do that in the status quo. And if it's possible using your epistemological method, show me a catalog of examples. Like, do tons of examples instead of just claiming in the abstract that this epistemological framework would work. Test like you're a judge in your worldview. Can you do that? Is that too much? Is that like imposing a cost on you, asking you to educate? You're calling for revolution. I think the burden is on you to show that you're not just bullshitting. Show me an example of how you actually demonstrate that an argument is operational. Show me how you test for due diligence. Show me. You don't show. You just claim. You just assert. Lying, it's not if you were lying. So yeah, this is me being loose with my language. I'm aware of that, but I'm just going to use the common language because this is what people receive reading your rhetoric until they get all into the language and start using your preferred words. But failing to perform due diligence against conspiracy to commit fraud. We all err. We cannot know we speak the truth. We can, however, know we perform due diligence against error, bias, deceit, fraud. I don't know that this is even, like, you're making a claim. This is an assertion. You have when you're calling for government, like, revolution against the government, I think you have the obligation of proving that, not just claiming it and saying, well, we can definitely know that we have performed due diligence. How do we know? How? How do we know that we performed due diligence? By what standard? Now, you have your steps, your epistemological steps, but they're not magic. Like, how do you know that each category of test applies in any given case, or that the test has been performed adequately? I don't know. And then, before I move on, let me just say he also hasn't addressed my other major. So the two epistemological critiques that I had were it puts the cart before the horse in assuming that a judge with no knowledge of the field he's evaluating or the work he's evaluating will be able to apply these tests and just prove it wrong or prove that it's, due diligence wasn't performed on it. And that's not how it works in the status quo. The people at the edge of research, the edge of putting out new things, there's not like some epistemological test that can be preset for them before they've put out their work. Like, they are the ones making these evaluations. They survive or they don't survive in the market. And you like markets and everything. Your system of epistemology is not a market-based thing. It's Curt's ipse dixit. It's Curt's assertion that this is the way to test ideas. And if due diligence just means following your preferred system of checking the validity of things, then again, it all just comes down to you have to agree with Curt's picture in a sentimental way. If this system was sufficient to bring about the next scientific revolution, then why isn't Curt achieving anything in science? What's Curt doing in science if he can evaluate science, if he can evaluate all this stuff? And I know he says that his is the science of human, of society, basically, or whatever his rhetoric is. I don't think so. This is all assertion. Reciprocity. I cannot find any possibility of anyone falsifying reciprocity except to defraud. Falsifying reciprocity? What does it mean to falsify reciprocity? It's a moral claim. Or that, people want reciprocity. Like, this is the kind of general, like, confusing language that people don't know what to, like, they don't know how to interpret it when they first encounter it. What does it mean to say, to falsify reciprocity? Like, you have this construct, a moral construct, of your formulation, your specific formulation of reciprocity, and what would it mean to falsify that? You assert it, yeah, it's there. It's there as your assertion. If I say that that's not the fundamental building block of a human cooperation, that that's not the end-all, be-all, like, how are you going to prove me wrong? Are you generalizing to say that all humans must operate according to reciprocity? Is it all organisms? I don't know. I think other sentiments are involved here. Desire to appear moral, desire to, like, you reduce things to the kinds of empirical sociology that you prefer, and that a lot of people in the right wing prefer. But ultimately, it's a utilitarian justification and nothing else. You like the kind of world where those are the criteria that people value, but people are free to value alternative things, like being altruistic, right? Not reciprocity, but goodwill. Not reciprocity, but generosity, or something like that. I don't know. There is something to reciprocity, but I wasn't actually arguing against. I'm just devil's advocate kind of arguing against it now, but reciprocity is like the least weak aspect of his system. Yeah, a lot of things are based on something close to your concept of reciprocity. But as far as I know, like rational choice, it is impossible. Again, if you use ideals, it is easy to engage in sophism and critique, but I have cataloged every single conflict I can find, and all of them are resolvable by tests of reciprocity. I don't know. This is just more assertion after assertion. The hard problem of consciousness is not hard, which is why people in cognitive science are panicking that we are going to reach it before knowing how to control it. Yeah, the difference between knowledge of experience, the construction of experience, and the experience of experience itself is meaningful in the discourse between man and machine, or man and an alternative life form, but it is not meaningful between humans, or else we could not communicate. That which we cannot communicate must be demonstrated. We're very good at this in all walks of life. It's called education. I still don't think, like, the central issue with the hard problem is what is experience as opposed to a system that generates experience, supposedly. What is it? What is qualia as opposed to quanta? What is experience? Because I asked Curt years ago what the universe boils down to, and he's apt to say things like forces or things like this. But what is experience as opposed to forces? Like, how do you get at experience out of blind, non-experiencing forces? My method is simple. Either you can testify to it or not. Yeah, this is your preferred method. And I don't know, have you operationally defined testimonialism in a universal way? Because there are different testimonialists who have their own unique opinions here. I'm not sure that you really have the end-all be-all. If you cannot, then we are left with your incentives to determine whether that what is not testifiable is somehow true. Yeah, so if you can't testify to it, then all we're left with is your incentives to determine whether what is not testifiable is somehow true. So we look at, do you have an incentive to lie? Do you have an incentive to deceive? So, I mean, the implication that I'm getting here is if I can't demonstrate something through testimonialism, which includes empirical testing, then you're going to have someone look at my motives, my incentives, and say those are bad incentives, he's probably lying, or those are good incentives, he's not lying. He claims that we can know incentives. I just think this is a huge overreach, and he, so often it's just the assertion. It's just the assertion. And I've repeated that enough, but it's true. Look at Curt's writing. It's so often just assertion after assertion. This is how cult leaders operate. And this is the big lie, if you just repeat things often enough, people start to believe them. It is almost impossible to find an example where one is both arguing for the truth of a proposition and doing so against testifiability, and at the same, more generalizability or generalizing, and at the same time not possessed of an incentive to deceive or defraud. I'm not even sure. Testifiability. Maybe I could look at his specific definition on his website for testifiability, but these questions are all reducible to some variation on the rationality of choice. In the end, all choices are rational in the sense that they are explicable. Well, I mean, you can't generalize to say that all choices are explicable. We don't have explanations for all choices, and that's the problem of induction, basically. You can't make that generalization. You can't speak in these universal terms, especially when you're a nominalist. You don't believe in universals. So I don't know. It degrades into incoherence past a certain point. And he has his own definition of rational, right? It's not just being reasonable, but I have to get through this. So we have eliminated this stuff from private property disputes and from common property disputes, but not from informational commons disputes. The courts are very good at adjudicating failures of due diligence. It's just claimed. I don't claim I am always right. I claim I don't make mistakes in my argument. Yeah, to my mind, that's basically the same. If all of your arguments don't contain mistakes, then they're good, right? If they don't have mistakes, then they might as well be right. I'm talking in general terms, not your specialized cult language. And I say it to bait. And I state frequently that this is a tactic to bait lazy thinkers. Okay, fair enough. The truth is that but like you say that here, I'm going to buy your frame, right? You always want people to buy your frame. That's how you persuade. But like, think about it. He's saying that he does it for this reason. What if he also does it because it's a good way to persuade people without actually making arguments? To build up prestige and rhetoric and a reputation for yourself, which is the same reason he would like post pictures of him and the women he's been with. This is about establishing social value, and then people receive the arguments more favorably. He has so much rhetoric, so little substance in this comment thread. Like, he's not actually making arguments. All of it's assertion, virtually. And the truth is that if I can construct a formal argument in operational terms, it is very hard for me to be wrong. You don't. You don't construct formal arguments in operational terms. You assert. It is very hard for anyone to be wrong doing that. The reason is that operational arguments exposes presumptions of knowledge and fictionalisms. I am right a lot. That's simply what it is. But it's because I artfully avoid taking a position on anything I can't make into a question that's decidable. I don't know. I think Curt takes a lot of positions that aren't ultimately demonstrable. Like I have to get back into my frame with idealism, but when he says that like consciousness is a product of evolution, that's a fallacy of like reifying causality. It's associated with evolution. That's all you can demonstrate. This is being very strict with it. You can't demonstrate that it's caused by evolution. Evolutionary systems are there. They're associated with conscious systems as we know them, but you can't say that one causes the other. And it goes as fundamental as this. If the universe is infinite, then all of it existed already. Consciousness doesn't exist because of these more primitive systems. It exists because everything exists, because the universe is infinite. That's a possibility, right? That is a possibility. The most common being various criticisms of homosexuality, abortion, and Christianity. I'm just going to move on. 8. Yes, there are many of us willing to fight for our civilization. I know that you're not. That doesn't make you a bad person. It means you just do not matter in the quest to save our people from the near immediate conquest. In other words, if you won't fight, you don't matter. I mean, this is just an aside, but like, Curt, why should I care that your world order comes to pass if we have to worry about like JF's notion of the revolutionary phenotype or some other kind of like being supplanted by artificial intelligence or like gray goo nanotech systems? Like, ultimately you want to become gods. What does that mean? Does that mean transhumanism? This is a point you don't really talk on very often, but like, are we gonna be biological humans into the future indefinitely? Because, I don't know, you talk in this frame that it's like it's about saving Western civilization, as if it's just going to go on in the same kind of biological framework it has been going on in. It may not. That's totally an aside, though. Assertion is how we force counter-argument. Otherwise, I bear the cost of Well, when someone counter-argues you on something, you don't address their counter-argument. You don't. This is your tactic for persuading someone. You assert something in your frame, they argue in response to it, and then you double down on your own frame without even meeting halfway at all. You don't argue the argument. You don't argue what the person is saying. So, like, this is a tactic rhetorically to get someone to adopt your frame so that they can even be engaged in debate in the first place. People are good-natured. They want to debate in good faith. And so if you never meet them in their frame of reference at all, or step outside of your own autistic brain and into someone else's brain for a second, and their own way of looking at things, if you never do that, then you force them into your frame, and then you just keep them there by never budging from your frame. That's, again, cult tactics. Never drop the frame. Otherwise, I bear the cost of education. Instead, bring a counter-argument. Yeah, you don't address the counter-arguments anyway. No justification provides truth, only survival from falsification. Yeah, I don't know. I think he like goes well beyond that in the actual stuff that he says. And if you look at, like, he says, I don't make mistakes, and then he's constantly putting up like things of a factual nature, or purported facts, and you could demonstrate I don't know, he doesn't demonstrate due diligence against error in those. He doesn't actually demonstrate it. So he doesn't follow those principles with his own writing. I mean, make it an exercise. Test everything you say publicly under the standards that you would have public speech tested. But you don't do that. It's hypocritical. And I think you go well beyond just surviving tests of falsification. You have your own metaphysical presuppositions that are too deeply ingrained in your worldview for you to accept that they are metaphysical, like causality, right? So I require an argument that would survive in court, and I do not consider it my job to educate. You have said in the past it is your job, but so what you and many others do is attempt to get me to educate you until you can propose a counter-argument. I argue against what you've said, or I ask you to clarify certain things. Again, if you're calling for this revolutionary movement and you're saying things that are ambiguous, which you use ambiguous terms often, and then I go to your website and it's not in your list of definitions, I don't think it's like not polite of me or something to ask for a definition or ask you to clarify what you mean by a given phrase. And this is all, again, rhetorically just a tactic to get someone deeper into the web of your vocabulary and your framework of explanation by saying, I don't make mistakes, don't force me to educate you, just, read everything that I've ever written. Yeah, that's indoctrination. You're trying to get people to become indoctrinated in your system. This is a fool's errand and too costly. Well, maybe you're imposing costs, Curt. I tend to take on arguments that are within a few steps of the next leap in reasoning. So vague. I tend to take on arguments that are within a few steps of the next leap in reasoning, and I do not take on the job of bringing people from kindergarten to grad school. This is how he responded to Chris Langan, who, if you've read Chris Langan's CTMU, you know that he demonstrates things very meticulously, and you can buy some of his methods or not from the beginning, but he dismisses it in this kind of wave of the hand way. I'm not going to educate people from kindergarten to grad school. All right, economics and everything. Slogans, more slogans. Good for rhetorical stuff, not good for a counter-argument. This is why I challenged to a debate where you actually debate in good faith both sides, not expecting that the other person adopts all your frame of reference. Maybe your frame of reference is wrong. You can't know that it's right. That's beyond, you can't know that it's absolute, and you know that you can't know via positiva that what your whole system is right positively. You say you can perform due diligence against being wrong, but you can't know that there was something you didn't think of like a metaphysical presupposition or something that just never entered into the equation. What you want me to do is accept your premises, except they are premises. I cannot, because they're just unjustifiable. What premise am I asking you to accept? You see, I'd like to argue with you about our premises mutually. You see, I won't accept anything that isn't on testifiable juridical terms. You won't accept juridical terms. Sorry, then don't debate me. You're calling for revolution, man. Like, you want, and maybe not explicitly at this point, but like, what if those terms, your specialized concept of testimonialism, what if those terms are not the best terms? Maybe, and this is another epistemological critique I had, what if there's a broader epistemological process culturally that goes on that requires error, that requires all these kinds of, loose talking, other than operational kinds of utterances. It requires all of that to filter through the whole society to work certain problems out. What if that's necessary? It's a possibility, and your worldview would deny that, would suppress that possibility from actuating itself. I want to debate you because I think you pose a threat to people, and I don't think you ever address certain fundamental issues. You never get down to the most fundamental presuppositions. Everyone has presuppositions. You don't want to get down to yours because then they're dubitable. That's why you won't accept arguing on any other frame than your own, so that no one ever has a chance to address your fundamental presuppositions, because you never admit to them. And if I argued with you, I would force you down to them if we were going to argue in good faith, instead of you just, like, an argument where I make a point, you respond to it, a counter investigation where, like, I ask for a clarification on things. If you just wanted to go on your own rhetoric, like that's fine, but it's not really an argument in the sense that I'm thinking of it. Where a debate is you make a point, the opponent like responds to it, and if they don't respond to it, then that's a point for you, like how college debate works, right? It's like a proper debate you don't want to have because it would inevitably get down to your presuppositions that you want to remain presuppositional. Gossip, shaming, rallying as a means of avoiding argument is different from that for not making an argument. This is just your claim, right? You say that the other people are not making an argument. I don't know, it's just very loose. I use it to punish circumvention of argument that would survive. Yeah, use it to punish people who don't argue in your frame. You want people in your frame where you make all the definitions, right? This is entirely a world of your making. You have all the definitions here. You say what's right and what's wrong ultimately. It's all your construction, and so you punish by gossip, rallying, and shaming anyone who doesn't accept operating in that framework. That's what you do. There is no contrariness here. I shame people who need shaming because they're not. Yeah, this is more rhetoric. Yes, I know you are therefore unable to make theological, supernatural, fantasy, and non-arguments. Yes, and the left can't make. Yeah, just repeating. Repetition. If you can't actually demonstrate arguments, just repeat assertions. That works. It actually does, though, which is the sad thing. Psychology. My argument is with Freudian psychology, which is an instance of critique. I use naturalism, the grammars, acquisitionism, reciprocity, and proprietarianism to explain human behavior in economic terms. In general, I rely on neural economy to explain most issues that are currently explained in less scientific terms. Yeah, I mean, Freudian psychology, Jungian psychology, this kind of loose literary type stuff. Like, I'm not a big fan of Freud either, but some of the stuff that Carl Jung says, obviously it's mystical type language, it's loose type language, but as you demonstrate, when you talk at a highly general level, it's not always going to be technical and operational language. Sometimes you do like make broad kinds of evaluations, and with Carl Jung, it's really like the core of his stuff is phenomenological analysis, and like he builds heuristic models, like, you know, boiling down consciousness into a thinking function, feeling function, sensation, and intuition. And so that's a heuristic for understanding experience from within, phenomenological analysis. You don't like phenomenological analysis that addresses experience itself and builds heuristics for us to understand it between each other, like it's a form of, you know, mental testimonialism, but you reject that kind of testimonialism. It's possible, though. It's what Buddhism does as well, just with a different kind of intention. But yeah, you just dismiss that categorically. You dismiss phenomenological analysis categorically. So yes, we are continuing to grow. This is all rhetoric up until the end. And like I said, he flatters up front, and then by the end, but let me scroll down to where he says it. But then cowards abed, shuddering under covers, leave no mark on history. Their names are forgotten, their people, their gods are replaced, and the souls of all those yet to be and all they have been, damn those cowards to the only hell there is for their cowardice, if there is any at all. He's so over the top and ridiculous with this rhetoric. It's rhetoric. It's all rhetoric. Do you realize that? Like, look at this whole comment. Did he actually demonstrate anything? Did he make an argument from first principles at all? It was, like I said in the video, all based on assertion, all expecting you to operate within his frame. Now again, I apologize if there were any technical issues. I wasn't able to monitor them. I have a cold, so I'm not thinking entirely straight, and my son was born on Tuesday, and so I didn't sleep the last 2 days, so maybe this wasn't the best time, but I did want to get something out. Hopefully you were able to understand what I was saying. Thank you for listening.